This is Critical Nonsense, our high-lowbrow show about culture, science, and tech. This week, all Aaron all the time. We're talking about the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air reunion and also cringing. Woo!
You promised the world, and I fell for it. I put you first, and you adored it. Set fires to my Joey. This is what a Joey sounds like.
Okay. And I said, Aaron, to the rain. I just did a different Set Fire song to try to make it work. But this is what an Aaron sounds like. Yeah. She burn. I'm sorry, I had to get that in there.
And this is what an executive producer in album titled 27, Jess Vander, sounds like.
Hi, this is Jess. Any relation to Adele, I will take.
Amen.
Any association.
The associations are abundant and clear. Your affection for Jamaican flag-themed bathing suits and cornrows.
And just like your living room, like being in your living room at times. Because Adele's in her living room a lot on Instagram. I don't know. I'm just,
What did she do?
She just exists, and she's just wonderful, much like you. So,
okay.
Yeah. Housekeeping? Do we have any?
I think my Swiffer wet jet is empty. Just Jess, I think you've got one.
Instead of housekeeping, I will share, as I was listening to a backlog of Daily Show with Trevor Noah, in the behind the scenes, he talks about how when doing impressions or, trying to create an accent of some kind, he always has a specific individual in mind, because there's no such thing as an insert blank accent, it's actually that it always has sort of an affect of the individual who speaks it. So for him, if he's doing some kind of accent, he's thinking of his friend who talks like this, or somebody that he met, or some famous person, which I thought was really funny. And so, yep.
The closest thing to that I have is that when you're trying to do an Australian accent, someone told me just don't open your mouth and just speak through your teeth. And if you don't have an Australian accent, you can fake it a little bit that way.
Oh, no.
Okay. Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Right. Wow.
What?
Wow.
No, the key from the Aussies, I know, the key is just to affectionately term everything.
Yep.
Yes.
Chocolate biscuits are chalky bicky, and everything is a short,
jumper.
cute, something
I
really
hope
sweet.
that even though Terry is a Kiwi, I hope our teammate is in Amsterdam just being like, this is the worst accent
kids.
I've ever heard.
These are
What
so
are you
bad.
doing? Why?
Oh, no.
Regionally so off base.
It's true.
Anyways.
Oh, boy.
Today, we have a special treat, which is an all Aaron all the time, day Aaron episode. All day
That's
Aaron.
the dance.
Topic number 1. Pow, pow,
Topic
go.
number 1. Okay, so I got a thought for y'all. And I have been spending a lot of time doing or catching up on sitcom reunions or like long-term reunions, and then watching their pilots, right?
Oh, okay.
And it's been really delightful. So like I don't think there's been a formal Curb Your Enthusiasm reunion, but I've watched a lot of interviews with everybody from the cast and then watched the pilot. And I did it with friends because we went to the Warner Brothers lot and saw like where they shot the reunion and all this stuff. So I figured, all right, let me watch the reunion and then watch the pilot. And of course I found myself doing this with the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, as I understand it to be called. That's how you pronounce it, right? The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
It's close. So watching it can be a lot for me because I was of an age that growing up, especially in a mostly white neighborhood, I was projected into the show by every person that I met that was my age, because everyone was watching it and everyone had literally like 3 young black stereotypes in their heads. It was like Webster, Carlton, and what you talking about, Willis? Which my brain is forgetting the name of. But in any case, Carlton was a new one. I know this is gonna be terrible. Joey's trying to remember it, and it's right on the tip of the tongue and the teeth. It's gonna stay in the ether for a moment, isn't it?
Gary Coleman.
Gary Coleman. That's it.
It's Different Strokes. Different Strokes.
Gary Coleman in Different Strokes. Perfect. So those were like the things. It was like Webster, Gary Coleman, or Carlton Banks. That Gary Coleman's a real person, but the character that Gary Coleman plays.
Arnold
was Gary Coleman's character. What you talking about, Willis, is the thing that Arnold said in the show, Different Strokes.
Different Strokes.
There we go.
Okay, cool. We got there.
Woven a tapestry. And so, reliving the show, the pilot, reliving the reunion and all of this, it's basically raised one burning question for me that truly has been throughout the ages. Who was Carlton Banks fooling?
Fooling about what?
That's fair. That's a question that demands a question in return. And of course, it's like a loaded question. But so the main thing, and let me, can I preach for a minute?
Spin us a yarn.
Let me spin.
Can you just spin a yarn? Yeah.
Tom Daly, where are my needles? You're winning a gold medal for Team GB. I can spin a yarn now. That's deep.
Nope.
This, no one knows that. So Carlton Banks was the oldest son in the Banks family on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And if you haven't seen the show, the main premise is that a young, wayward youth from the streets of Philadelphia, as played by Will Smith,
West Philadelphia specifically,
born and raised, moves from West Philadelphia into the richest neighborhood, one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in America, with his family, with his aunt's family. And so he's with his aunt and Uncle Phil, Aunt Viv, and then he's also got his 3, eventually 4 cousins when Ross Bagwell's character joined the cast. Carlton Banks and Hillary Banks are the oldest siblings, and Carlton was the joke of the show. And I think that the reason I like pilots in general is because they are famously terrible. And it's because they have to be, right? Like a pilot has to allow a studio to feel confident that there's enough meat in the characters and in the story to justify anywhere from 1 to 7 seasons. So you have to do all of that in 22 minutes. And pilots, they're just schlocky and corny.
Exposition. Oh, exposition.
Dramatic moment. Resolution, warm clapping.
Exposition.
Exposition. It really is. And the pilot for Fresh Prince is no stranger to that. It falls prey to that quite significantly. The thing with Carlton is that he definitely was written in as the joke of the show, and it's a subversive joke. He is this black character who is supposed to be written as the antithesis of blackness. And that's the foil that they sort of create in this pilot between Will and Carlton. And where Will is sort of positioned as the apotheosis of blackness, and then Carlton is this shamed Uncle Tom, embarrassed character who has shunned his blackness for the whiteness that came with wealth. What's so interesting is that the show, over the course of the show, just breaks that. They play with that. It's still there, but they actually use that in really clever ways over the course of the show to try to help the audience view these characters with a different type of critique than they would black characters that they're used to seeing on TV, namely Carlton and Hillary. But then also they are throughout the show, they're showing where blackness is simply complicated and it is not one thing. And that Will and Carlton ultimately find their common ground via all of the parts of who they are rather than in spite of them. And that is sort of, it almost transcends race, but it's somehow very firmly and explicitly grounded in race at the same time. So in any case, like when I asked the question, like, who is Carlton Banks fooling? Clearly my answer is he was fooling the audience into thinking that he was the fool, that he was written in as this, purely as the buffoon, purely as like a vaudevillian cudgel of hilarity. I don't believe that that's a phrase that has ever been uttered because it doesn't make much sense. But that sort of, I think, I do believe that ultimately Carlton successfully over the run of the show became this like a perfect vessel for understanding the multitudes of blackness. And I really appreciate that. And that's not what the pilot sets you up to think as an audience member. And I think that's cool.
Yeah, I think the show is interesting in that way. Like, especially some of those like key moments, like in rewatching that reunion or in watching the reunion special and sort of like thinking about what it meant to the world. I mean, Carlton, in a lot of ways, he wasn't necessarily like, he wasn't the first Blerd, right? But he maybe was like the first like mainstream representation of a Blerd, right? The idea, and like by the end of it, Carlton be Blerd, like black nerd.
Which we are going to unpack because it's a very interesting type of black nerdery that Carlton is set up to be.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think all of the other things, like he is used as a device or like a set piece in so many episodes as like the foil to understanding a concept, right? Where he is sort of like the intermediary between whiteness and blackness, right? Like in the, they covered it in the reunion show, but the idea of like the being pulled over by the police episode and how Will responds versus how Carlton responds, whose father is a judge, and right, like he's not scared of the police, and Will's explaining to him why like driving while black is a concept. And so in that moment, he is both black and being used as a means to represent sort of like the white naivete to the black experience, and is like, he's forced to be so many things in the show because he is the device consistently to demonstrate some aspect of the black experience, that he becomes so much more multifaceted, both through like the learning that he develops through the show. Like he becomes, I don't know whether people experienced it this way at the time because of, while we've come a long way in the public conversation, obviously it's not like things are resolved now that were problematic 30 years ago when the show was airing. But at the same time, it is like this idea of like, he becomes a means for a white person to identify with someone on the show that is also going through the experience of understanding what it means to be part of the black experience, as like Will is being that sort of quintessential like sage black man to Carlton's like naive, Uncle Tom, as you described it, right? Like they're both being forced to play archetypical characters, but by the end of it, like the learning has crossed, and there are episodes where Carlton is teaching Will things that he is naive about in sort of like the broader system of life and like school and politics and like all of these different things too. It is such like a interesting device where like the lines begin to blur, and what starts as like two ends of a spectrum starts to like bleed together, and both of them are sitting somewhere along it.
And I love that within that, there are so few other shows that have been able to replicate it authentically. And what I mean by authentically is that the white gaze oftentimes for a lot of certain shows that were in that era, like between like 88, maybe even the 70s, like it goes back that far, truly, up until the mid 90s, where you started to have like UPN and other networks that were really taking advantage of a black block of television viewers, and that were creating black focused blocks of TV with Martin or Homeboys in Outer Space, which I still think is a great show. The Wayans Brothers, like all those shows, Moesha, like there are tons of them, right? Girlfriends. But what they weren't necessarily, but none of those shows did and what made them unique is that they weren't playing to a white audience, so they didn't internalize some of these conversations that Black folks don't have with each other. And what the Fresh Prince did was sort of bridge that later era with the one before it, where a lot of these shows, in order to have audiences, had to incorporate these certain like discussion points and topics of conversation that were seen as necessary for a white audience to identify with the stories. And the Fresh Prince actually allowed everybody to understand, like, you don't have to do that for the story to be meaningful and to be interesting and to be inviting. Like, they bring it up a little bit in the reunion too, but like, I think it's probably the most talked about episode. It's where Hillary's fiance is proposing to her while bungee jumping. Yes, he's skydiving.
Bungee jumping. It was bungee jumping. You're right.
And all the "Will you marry?" and we are literally, it's so cool because the camera angle is us as the audience looking from the TV at the entire family with Hillary in a wedding dress watching this on TV, and the like universal like hilarity of that moment is just, it's something superlative. And it has nothing to do with audiences, like this race of audiences. Like, that is just a ridiculous premise.
It's just everyone will find that funny.
Yes.
Can we? I'm sorry. Before we get too far, I feel like I need more context on the Blurred.
I got thoughts on Blurred. I know you got thoughts on Blurred too, Joey.
You have 35 years of thoughts on Blurred. Roundabout. So there's a couple things. I think one is that there's so much. The idea of a Blurred, even as a coined term, just to quickly hit it, like we throw, and it's like not like super widely like thrown around, but it's certainly something that like some folks will say. But it's interesting that like as I would say usual, blackness is used to modify the thing that is presumed to otherwise be white. So it's like BL-erd, like Blurred. Even though there's no whiteness with nerd, we still said nerd. Black nerd needs to be the
qualifier. Like girl boss, you know?
Right,
like,
right.
What is
and
that?
there's tension in there. There's so much tension in there where it's like recognize that we are here and recognize that there is a suggestion or an implication about who is defined by this group and we're not represented, but also just make us a part of the definition. Anyway, so that's my mini rant. I never got off the soapbox. Look at that. How funny. Then the other thing.
Let's go here.
With Carlton is not necessarily painted as a nerd in the way that we would think Revenge of the Nerds from like National Lampoon. But what he is painted as is atypical. So he loves Tom Jones. He loves polo. He wears Ralph Lauren. He does the Carlton dance. Like,
he's bad at sports.
Bad at sports, loves politics, really interested in schoolwork and being smart and top of the class. Like, potentially
a young Republican. Am I wrong in that?
No, you are right. And when Donald Trump was on the show, he was, it's interesting because that was in the business days of Donald Trump. And Carlton is just like fawning all over him because he's
business days or entertainment days. I'm not sure. Certain which difference there is.
This could be my rabbit hole. This could be the rabbit hole that I die in if I go down it. But
was it
ultimately?
Yeah, I don't know time.
It was before he was doing The Apprentice, but he was dropping into movies here and there. But he was still really best known for hotel related ventures, we'll put it that way. But like now when we talk about Blerds, like I'll talk about Childish Gambino specifically as like not Donald Glover, but Childish Gambino as a rapper, as a character that is the rapper that he is like on stage. Like he often talks about, or even better yet, how that character even comes through on Community when he plays his character on Community. Like that's actually like, oh no, you like fantasy, you like Dungeons and Dragons, you like these things that are coded as nerdery, like broadly and pulled in.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think, even though they're very, very different, I do think that they're both written as like, these are not the typical folks that you expect to see in this skin loving these things. And I think that there's clearly a lot of value in that. And that's one of the things that the show allowed there later on to be a lot more specific and nuanced understandings of Blerds and what a Blerd could be.
Well, I think there is the aspect of what you had said in terms of like a modification of an existing concept. I think is one way to see it, and I also like I don't have any like refutation against that, but I think there's like also a different way to see it where the show was potentially, as I'm going through it, trying to think back to like other shows. I haven't watched every sitcom, but I think it was sort of a turning point where there was like a demonstration of compound identity within the characters that you typically had characters, even in shows that came after, that tended to be more one note, and you would play the show just by hitting that one note, hitting this one note, and at least in my own memory, that show was really interesting in the way that it was able to build these sort of compound identities. And so even the concept of blurred is interesting to me because I don't, at least in the experiences that I've had where people are using the term, it is often Black people using the term to say that like Blackness is part of my identity and also nerdiness is part of my identity. And so I'm going to bring those things together in this concept to demonstrate that like nerddom isn't the totality of how I see myself, that like my Blackness is sort of front and center in the way that I'm interpreting this concept with these other things that come with it. Like, just as an aside, I heard about a podcast recently called 3 Black Halflings, which is apparently 3 Black, like nerdy D&D players that like started a show about just like Blackness within Dungeons and Dragons and like their experiences and stuff like that. But that idea of like compound identity, because you saw it in other characters as well, right? Like Will was like a class clown and a jokester, but also like his ambition began to demonstrate in the show, and his affections and his orientation towards like race and his relationship with Uncle Phil, and like all of these things came out. And the younger sister Ashley is
Ashley. Oh yeah, Tatiana with her amazing album.
She was like, her thing was like, I grew up in this environment, but I'm also Black, and dancing and singing and all of these other things are like part of my, like everyone wound up having, like Aunt Viv had that, like those moments where she's like proper and all of a sudden she like pops the earrings off and is like, I'm about to be ratchet right now. And Uncle Phil's like, the sort of like stern, like Black uncle, like prototype, like separated from being the judge and those things, like everyone wound up having these like really, even the butler character who was also
Jeffrey,
Jeffrey as like this sort of, like a like house slave character used in that context to like push back against those sort of historical ideas of like what an individual can and can't be. It is so funny that you talk about it as like what you thought the show was going to be in the beginning to what it became by the time you got to the end of it, and how complex everyone wound up becoming, and like starting you off with a bunch of archetypes and ideas of like, I know this character, and continually like reinforce that like you don't know this character, and people are more complex and nuanced, and Blackness isn't a monolith, and the culture is like deeper and richer than that, and like no person needs to like carry the entire weight of Blackness, because Blackness is bigger than that and can be robust. Like basically good job Good job.
Good job, show. Good job, Benny Medina, for living that life and then having Quincy Jones fund it into a TV show. But I think that specifically the Aunt Viv situation and the Jeffrey situation are very, very interesting that you bring up. So Aunt Viv, as in the actress who played Aunt Viv, famously the original, the best actress, left the show around season 3. At the end of season 3, and they brought in a new Aunt Viv, but they didn't the show did not explain it at all. It's and remember, this is before the internet and all that, so you just turned it off at the end of one season. You come back and you're like, who is this woman? And why is everybody calling her mom? Oh, we're just supposed to, we're just going along
exposition.
With this. Cool.
But it's not, I think, everything that I've discussed and talked about and seen written about this was never about the fact that they just switched the actress. It was about the woman that Aunt Viv represented, this dark-skinned, black, strong, intelligent, empathetic, complicated woman that had never been seen on television. They replaced with a lighter-skinned woman who was much less interesting of a character. It's like they took the same person. In real life, it would be like if, you didn't see someone for a year and then they just all of their verve disappeared.
And
that's how the
gone.
character played out. Exactly. And so you had this sort of challenge. And, sometimes I wonder if this should have been who was Aunt Viv fooling with that season switch over? That ain't the same person, girl. That Maury, that ain't the same person. But ultimately, that switch up is something that did not fool audiences at all. Audiences who wanted that character and who fell in love with that character never forgave the new Aunt Viv for coming on. For better or for worse, she's a fine actress. There's nothing wrong with her, and the writers are the ones that actually played to this new character, not necessarily the woman playing it. So you've got all this going on. Then you've got the dynamics of Jeffrey as a character. And I think that he does such an interesting, of all the characters in the show, he's the most interesting. Because you've got someone who's in a fundamentally subservient role as the house butler for the family, but he's black. So there is a sort of shared experience or commonality, but he's British. And so that also adds this element of distance. And so the show always flirts with this line for a long, long time of is Jeffrey a part of the family or not? Should we be thinking of him as a part of the family or not? And ultimately we do. But we respect that he has a biological family elsewhere. And that comes up in the finale, and he leaves town and all of that. But forcing the audience to deal with these complications, this multifacetedness, whether we're talking about any of these individual characters, but also the sort of stories that they represent and refract from the audiences that are watching and falling in love, is so cool. And is something that the show, yes, again, brava show.
Yeah, and the sort of, to your point, they confronted so many of those things, right? The sort of stereotypes or biases or fundamental racism around the servile aspects of how black people are supposed to participate in society while he is serving a black family. The complexity of putting all of these issues through the lens of blackness. I haven't thought about this show in this level of complexity before, but I'm going back through episodes in my head as you're bringing these things up, and it's just I always loved the show. I watched it every Tuesday night or something, or it was probably one of those things where it changed nights and stuff like that. But I was as soon I was allowed to stay up a little later on the night that Fresh Prince was on TV and stuff like that. But also, I guess I was 9 or something when I'm watching these episodes. Did not have historical context for the roles or archetypes that these people were supposed to be playing.
And I know that we're about to roll. Yeah, I see it. Oh, it's coming up. It is Jess's wrap-up corner. It's right at the end of these next two sentences, I think. Is how those roles and archetypes played out in The Cosby Show versus this show, which were both shows about, or that flirted with the idea of a new Black middle and upper class, and what that meant for Black folks who now existed in a much more complex station in life, where some folks were more distant from what was seen as Blackness than they were before. And what do you do with that? What do we do with that? Black people do with that? And then what do we societally at large do with that? Oh, oops, I tripped. I tripped into Jess's wrap-up corner. Gee willikers, these shoes are not tied right. Oh my goodness. That might as well have been Carlton. Gee willikers.
To borrow from Aaron's eloquent phrase, Fresh Prince, forcing the audience to face this unforeseen multifacetedness, an alliteration that could only come straight from Aaron naturally. Just, this is perfect. And also, is this a terrible time to say I've never seen it and I have a lot to get to now?
That's great. This is not a plug for them, but HBO Max, go check it out.
Really? Wow, This is like the coolest thing. And at minimum, it sounds like the reunion special, or is that like Spoiler City? Should you just
Spoiler City, but
okay.
It's not like it, I mean, there's like, they talk about concepts of sort of like groundbreaking episodes, like important episodes in the series where they were confronting sort of major topics. Like every episode obviously was tackling something, but you know, like the getting pulled over episode was like, this is like a thing that we need to talk about. Isn't being talked about in this way in like mass media and stuff like that. And so those types of things, you're definitely getting spoilers of individual episodes.
But fortunately, you will not have any like the red wedding of the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. There will be no spoiler moments like that. You'll be fine. That was a Game of Thrones reference, if that might have gone over.
I've never seen Game of Thrones.
Totally fair.
I haven't seen
It's Jess, and I hate culture.
Yes.
The break is over. How fast can a fast and a fasty food? Like, I don't know. Aaron,
Hello.
was that
Yes.
cringy?
Listen, you know, let me. I'm going to touch on this one real quick. So I do have a second topic. It does not involve my complete inability to speak and or tongue twisters, but the most difficult and some of the cringiest moments that were in my childhood, like as I look back on them, they were minor, but it was, for example, when people would ask me to do the Carlton dance. Because people would walk up to me in school like I was Alfonso Ribeiro and be like, do the Carlton. And I would like do it because I'm a good dancer. But I literally now am flashing back and I'm like, you know, the camera above this little 12-year-old's head surrounded by white kids who are all asking him to do the Carlton and doing it and not understanding the gravity of that and not understanding why why I don't need to do that and why I'm a student like at a high school or a middle school. I am not an actor on TV, you know, now like there's a little bit of cringe there as I look back at that. And that sort of sent me down a little bit of a rabbit hole in the shower the other day. And I was just like flashing back to all these other like cringe inducing moments from my past and like, you know, like shaking, just like, oh, like the shockwaves of shame that come flying back as though like I'm in that moment doing it again and just being like, oh, stop, young Padawan warrior. Don't go in. Just stop it. So all of this comes to a very simple question. Why does cringe never go away?
I feel like cringe potentially gets worse. Like not even that it goes away because of the aspect of memory where the mind state you're in which you retrieve a memory like forever changes it. Like the memory is corrupted by the mind state that you're in when you accessed it. And so if you think back to something and feel shame, then the next time you think back to it, you're going to like perpetually feel more and more shame, and you build it into like something weirder and weirder. Like in that one Carlton example, like in the moment, it may have been like less cringy because you were all doing something, but like the way in which you begin to memorize, like remember it and formalize it gets like worse and worse, or like some experience where you feel like you did something dumb, but in the moment, like no one actually really noticed or thought it was that bad, but like you're thinking about it and you're thinking like in your memory, everyone saw it and everyone made some sort of like perception or value judgment on you. But let me tell you that like the cringy factor, I've been getting like the same flashes. I don't know if it's like a life stage thing, like men of a certain age, or if this is like an everyone thing.
No,
but,
this might be a you thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or if there's like a conscientiousness, like if you're high on conscientiousness, which I think we both are in terms of like the personality type, like it is worse to feel cringe, right? Like, are you capable of feeling shame? Are you prone to feeling shame? Are you feeling shame in contexts where you maybe like shouldn't, or there's no need for it? And then you're just like going into your memories and being like, "Ooh, I bought a girl gum every day for a year and brought it to her without talking to her. I just gave her a pack of gum every day in 7th grade. Like, what was I doing? Why did I think like that was going?
It's too much gum. It's just so much. Like,
what did she do with all of that gum?
What did she do?
What is wrong with me?
Okay, so this is the thing. Shame, or not cringe, different than shame. I think cringe and shame are best buddies. It's like a cringe and shame parfait. And like you're saying, Joey, every time you remember it, there's another layer. There's another graham cracker of, oh God. But it's also like a communicable disease, because as soon as you describe your shame or your cringe, it sparks an old other cringe. And like you and the gum, and I've heard the gum story before. Yeah, you just reminded me of one that I am not going to repeat on the air. I'm not telling that story. But similarly, gave a gift in middle school, and it's just like I remember everybody running around being like, "Who gave him that?" And again, like young in the closet, Aaron giving another boy a gift, regardless, secretly in his locker, and I had to like find his locker combination from Friends. It was a whole thing. It was just. Oh, the cringe. It doesn't go away. And I think that there's like I feel like there's two pieces of DNA that are always in there too. There's like these like woefully miscalculated confidence in the moment of like whatever it was, we thought it was right. And it was something that was like we were resolute in doing it or thinking it, and it was like unambiguously the right thing to do at the time, and somehow the only action that could be taken, which marries with this like complete lack of like internal and external like perspective congruence. Like you couldn't live outside yourself in that moment to see how off that could be perceived. And of course now with distance, all we have is that sort of time and perspective, and we're just like hard on ourselves, y'all. Each of us individually is 10 times harder on us than most people that we know, right? And so you just throw all those things in the blender, and Eric Repairs Repair Shop, boom, you've got a shame parfait.
Eric Repairs.
Like, Eric Repairs eclairs in pairs.
It reminds me of something Osei said in our conversation last week. He said, nothing we do ages well. And it was in the context of our collective narrative and historical, like societally, everything culturally, we look back and we're like, oh, wow, huge mistake. Like I can't believe we did that. But it's kind of brilliant that now we're on to sort of the personal experience of the same thread, which is that even looking at your own lived experience, the perspective you can have changes how you even conceive of your memories.
Yeah. I mean, there is like a dynamic of this where there is like the feeling of something that actually makes you cringe. And I think there is also like the way in which it is increasingly being used in a sort of colloquial or sort of like almost mimetic way often today is more oriented towards like hardos or tryhards, where it's like if someone is trying too hard or like super earnest about something, someone will say it's cringe because like they're trying too hard in the moment. But I think this idea that we're talking about, just like as the distinction is like the retrograde shame that you feel, or like retroactive shame rather, that you feel about like doing something that often it is like the fucking Rod Stewart song, like I wish that I knew then what I know now, or whatever. Like like that idea of like you are aware today of something that you weren't aware of historically, and that is what makes it terrible, because you are interacting with your own historical ignorance. And that can be like social ignorance, that can be like interpersonal ignorance, it can be just like conceptual. I remember like I was at a party once. This is like a very like cringy thing that I like occasionally revisit and feel like the worst, like terrible feeling. And so I'm going to share it with you.
Communicable, yes.
Is someone I was at a party like with enough friends, like in college. We went down to visit, and these people showed up at the door, banging on the door, and they were like, someone in this party stole all of our CDs from our car. Like, who was it? Like, I know someone here stole all of our CDs out of our car, or whatever. And I was like, I just driven down. My parents had like just gotten a used BMW. But to me, having grown up with no money, it was like this moment of like, oh, my family is like doing kind of well now. Like, in hindsight, knowing what I know now is like, it was just a fucking car. But I was like, I drove here in a BMW. How could I have possibly stolen your CDs from you? And like that like thought process, to me, I revisit it on like a pretty regular basis and just think about like how ignorant I was and how sort of like unworldly or like unaware conceptually it was, where I was just like, my parents are now in like a middle class stature, so I would never steal CDs from you, as like a very like logical ipso facto type of statement. Like, I feel such deep shame about it on like a recurring basis, and will cringe in the shower like you're talking about.
But this like, I don't know, the way you put it about confronting your ignorance, again, it's because that stinking ignorance book is now everywhere in my life, and I can't get it out of my head. Darn you, Dan de Nicola. But anyway, it's this, that you even, the thing is like that you feel that negatively is actually part of the bad thing about cringe, is that it makes you feel like you need to dwell on your past ignorance instead of actually being excited that you have a kind of enlightenment to be able to have the awareness of it. You know what I mean? That like, that instead it's really easy to be like, like I don't even know. I'm embarrassed to share the thing that I did the other day, that because it's the same thing of like,
I feel real embarrassed right now.
It's like, I'm embarrassed I didn't know, but actually it's so obvious now that I know more things. Like, I guess I should be celebrating the fact that now I know something, and hopefully I should do something with that knowledge. Like, you know, don't assume that a stranger who approaches you is a scary person, and it might just be that they can't speak to you with words.
Well, I'll sit there with you, because we're on, literally everyone listening to this is on the same cringe raft, so no one is above this. Everyone has done this. So I'll at least add this sail to the mast. To the
to these cringy metaphors.
To these cringy metaphors.
To the USS raft. Cringe.
Just to help, that gift that I was talking about that I gave another guy in like middle school,
Yeah.
I bought it at Spencer's. It was body chocolate. It was like with a paintbrush and like a teddy bear. I wish that all the listeners who are listening right now could see Alex, Joey, and Jess's face as that fact just landed. Because Alex literally just backed away from the screen in horror. And let me tell you, I live with that shame every day of my life. And now I've released it into the wild. You know what? This is...
Wow.
but now I have the knowledge. I have the awareness.
There are arenas in which I think cringe is especially bad, right? And I think it tends to probably be oriented towards, right? If we say this is retroactive ignorance being relived, then the arenas where there are things that are taboo, right? Like the one that I mentioned had to do with ignorance around money. Money is like certainly a taboo subject. Like people didn't have conversations about it. I was like, young, maybe like 20 or something. I had like no concepts around money. And so that moment of like the retroactive ignorance, yours was around sexuality, right? And like is another taboo subject. And like also the incitement of like Spencer's and some of these other things made me go into some of my own like high school aged Spencer's gift related ignorance. But it is like the more taboo the subject where people are uncomfortable talking about it also increases your ignorance. So it's like more likely to be an arena in which you will later feel extremely cringy. And race like being another one, right?
Yes, that's fascinating. There's all the cringy moments that I'm thinking of were related to things that I felt that I, over time, really had to figure out for myself. And it's sort of like why didn't anyone tell you that? And it's because it was taboo. Like, I don't know why it would be necessary for someone to tell you about body chocolate. Oh, God.
Body chocolate.
No. It's now it's in the vault. It's on a separate raft. No, we're putting it in a small dinghy. It's going over a waterfall. It's gone. It's gone to never be spoken of again. But y'all, I really appreciate you holding, and I'm glad that I can also hold your cringe together.
Do we all feel terrible?
Like literally awful. Awful. Can we burn this?
No.
Can you burn audio? Is that possible?
I think Joey expressed this perfectly when he described the reason cringe is so painful is that you're facing all the things you didn't know, and now that you do, you can't ignore them, and you might find yourself in the shower listening to this podcast and facing your own cringe, and for that, we are sorry.
Yes, and we welcome you to the raft of every human being that's ever lived. It's a very small raft, but it fits.
Yeah. And if you want, just like, not the one that you're on, but like a different raft, just like put your body chocolates on that raft and just send them away.
And just go. I can't escape it.
Critical Nonsense is a Sylvain production.
Brought to you by Dramamine for all of your cringiest stomach-inducing moments that are happening right now.
We'd like to thank executive producer and body shiver, Jess Vander.
We'd also like to thank sound engineer and weird, like, creepy baby doll enthusiast, Alex Contel. Thanks a lot, Alex.
So creepy.
We'd like to thank programming coordinator Les Jacobs for never being awkward ever.
And the production duo that duos no harm, Sarah Gilbert and Nora Mestrich. Thank you, y'all.
Was that cringe? I don't know.
Yeah, I gotta get him in there.
No, I just loved it. I loved it.
And as always, we love you. Thank you. We're sorry, Elen.
So sorry.
And in this week's special condolences.
You know, I actually have to thank y'all, as I do probably more often than we should in the special thanks, because you're holding on to this cringe, and every time that someone cringes, you cringe. So it's like, it's not fun when it comes up. So thanks for doing that together. That was fun.
My face hurts because of how much I've literally been cringing and holding my own face. I'm like,
I know.
My skin is tender.
Your body is like,
it's just.
I think I'm stress sweating.
Those sounds of holding on to things. Oh, special thanks to the following collective breath we're all about to do to release this cringe.
Love. Yes.
Oh, that actually felt really good.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
I do feel better.
Disappeared. I would like to thank the musical artist behind Are You Jimmy Ray? And I have to look this. Oh, yep, it was by Jimmy Ray. That makes sense.
Yeah, I was gonna say, wasn't it just Jimmy Ray? Who wants to know?
It's true. Yeah. Who wants to know? Who wants to know about who?
I'd like to thank also Jimmy's Chicken Shack for their contributions to the musical canon.
Also,
was it Jimmy's Chicken Shack?
John's.
Yeah, it was, right?
I only know the Jimmy's. Yeah, Jimmy John's and Jimmy's That Eat
Globes.
World. Those are like the ones that I'm familiar with.
Jimmy's Chicken Shack, a rock band of the same era.
Jimmy
Jam? You can also have some Jimmy Jam. Jimmy Kimmel.
Jimmy's
Live.
Sprinkles.
Jimmy Jambies.
What's
Jambi
happening?
Pants. I think that we've fallen
happening?
apart. I think that's it.
Do you guys have a stroke?
Yeah. Done. Bye, friends.
Love you.
Are we ready? That tractor beam gets you. Yes. Baby buggy bumpers. Scottish. The rubber baby boogie bumpers. Rubber baby boogie bumpers. The rubber baby boogie bumpers. I'm almost there.
Your head is huge.
It's like an orange on a toothpick. I can't get there. It's so close.
It sounds like Mike Myers Shrek.
It is Mike Myers. It is Mike Myers.
Yes, that worked. It did it.
Yeah.
Joey, it worked.